Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute's Next Round podcast. I'm Rowena Itchon, Senior Vice President, and with me is Tim Anaya, Senior Director of Communications.
Hi, Ro. How are you?
Great, Tim. Fantastic work on our Sacramento conference last week. It was really terrific. And we are going to take the various presentations and make them podcasts.
Yes, you'll have off and on for the next month or month and a half, you'll get to hear all the great things that if you weren't there in person, you'll get to experience all the great panel discussions and speakers. You know, we got great reviews from all of the attendees, and I'm really excited for everybody to hear, especially our keynote speaker, Anne-Marie Schubert, who is someone who's going places.
That's right. So in this podcast, it's actually from a live event we had last week with Michael Shellenberger on his book, San Fransicko, Why Progressives Ruin Cities. Now, Michael discusses the city's struggles with lawlessness, homelessness, violent crime, drug abuse, and really how San Francisco's leaders have enacted policies that continually fail to manage these issues.
If you think about it, all of the issues that are kind of these issues of urban decay, education, life on the streets, crime. San Francisco really is the epicenter of it all. So there's the perfect place to have the lunch, and certainly a great unifying theme to have a book talking about all of these issues. And with the school board being overwhelmingly recalled and politicians of all stripes growing more frustrated, even those who supported a lot of these questionable policies in the first place that are leading to this urban decay. I think you'll all find it's a really interesting and spot-on discussion.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that the school board recall it's going to be a catalyst for change in this city. I think residents are really tiring of all of these policies that are pursuing an agenda rather than putting children first. And the residents of San Francisco finally are up in arms about these issues, schools, crime, homelessness. The fact is that San Franciscans they're only 6% Republicans in San Francisco. The rest are all Democrats. This is not an ideological issue. They want to put children first and their city first.
What do they say? You can fit the Republican Party in a phone booth in San Francisco. Yes. It's probably not much of an exaggeration.
So thanks everyone for listening. We're going to keep this short because it's a lengthier presentation. So we think you'll really enjoy it. Thanks so much.
I always have to remind myself, do conservatives hug? You know, like the tie was like, you see you got the top half. The bottom half is fully liberal. The top half is, right of San Francisco. What a pleasure to be with you. This is a really important think tank. I pillaged your reports on homelessness, stole everything I could, gave you as little credit as possible, which, as Steve knows, that's my MO. Pleasure to be here with all of you guys today. I think you all know that we are in a very serious crisis that goes much farther beyond just what we see on the streets. We're dealing with significant threats to our most important institutions, the institutions that make civilization possible. And that may sound like an exaggeration, but cities are obviously a big part of that. The word civilization means cities. It comes from city life. But we see the undermining of the critical institutions that make what we call civilization possible: policing, psychiatry, probation, the criminal justice system, universities, schools. And it's a disaster. I mean, it's you guys have been talking about it for a lot longer than I have. Am I too loud? Is it too loud? I'm just too intense. I'm just gonna hold it right here. Do I even need the mic back there? Should I just talk? I'll just do it like this. It's okay? Like that? Okay. You need the mic for the recording. Okay. At the same time, I don't think that this problem is going to be solved by the left. While I think that the left is mostly to blame for this effort to undermine these critical institutions, I think the solution has to come from the center right, which means you, not me, or at least not me until very recently. And I could see why you might not want to believe that, because right now, I think Republicans are 25% of the electorate in California. Democrats are 45%, independents are the rest. You have no good Republican candidate running for governor. Sorry. You may get one, but so far we're not seeing anybody, and it's not clear to anybody that a Republican could be elected in California anymore. And conservatives and Republicans simply haven't offered a proper solution to this problem. Sorry. If you had, then maybe you would have more than 25% of the electorate, and PRI and the mayor would feel the need to come here, and the members of the Board of Supervisors would feel the need to come here. But they don't. And that's in part due to the failure of the political right to offer a solution to this problem. So everybody, I think, needs to evolve at this moment. I wrote San Fransicko aimed at the left. It's a book called Why Progressives Ruin Cities. It's an indictment of the ideology that led to the disaster on the street. But what I'm going to talk about today is why the right failed too, and why the right needs to come back if it's going to save this civilization and save our city. But let's start at the beginning. How many people have actually read San Fransicko? Just so who I know I'm... How many have listened to me on a podcast or think you have a basic idea of what it is? Oh, good. So there's some people that have no idea. I'll be talking to this table here. You're all in trouble. It's fine. I worked in the late 1990s on drug policy reform, on decriminalization. I worked for George Soros's foundation. I worked for other drug policy foundations. I worked to decriminalize drugs with the idea that doing so we'd help people to get medical care that they need. That was the idea. I worked with Maxine Waters to get civil rights leaders to support needle exchange, federal funding for needle exchange, because I think needle exchange was important to saving lives. And then around 2000, I shifted my focus to be entirely on the environment. And it's a complex subject. Apocalypse Never, if you haven't read it, goes into all of the big questions you might have about climate change, rainforests, plastics. But after I got done with that book and I saw the end of that, I feel like I got to the bottom of something, and I knew that this is something I wanted to write about. What the hell is going on in San Francisco? And what the hell is going on in liberal West Coast cities in general? Somebody needed to answer that question. And I knew it was complex and it required a book. It wasn't going to be an article. And it really starts, it starts in 2017. I see the headline, 70,000 deaths from drug overdoses. When I left the field in the year 2000, it was 17,000 deaths. So 17,000 deaths to 70,000. What went on? Well, we know it had something to do with the opioid epidemic. But what's happening? Why we do harm reduction? Harm reduction is supposed to save lives. Why is harm reduction not saving lives? Get to 2019. I'm in the Netherlands. A member of parliament has invited me out to talk about nuclear power. And we're driving back from Delft to Amsterdam. And she says, you might be interested in talking to my husband because he works on drug policy. And he's this kind of stocky, he's a former second division soccer player. He looks just like the British action hero Jason Statham, from the Lock, Stock, and you guys know those movies? Yeah? Just a liberal thing? No. Okay. Jason Statham, stocky, strong guy, action figure. And I was like, Renee, his name's Renee, what's good? Like, what have you been to San Francisco? Like, what is going on? The reputation of Amsterdam is that there's a bunch of heroin addicts in your parks shooting up. I haven't seen a single homeless person in all of Amsterdam. What did you guys do? Have you been to San Francisco? And he just goes, yes, of course, I've been to San Francisco. Sorry, my Dutch accent's not very good. I've been to San Francisco. I haven't even gotten to the angry part of my speech yet. Yes, of course, we've done rounds in San Francisco. We go to San Francisco. I'm like, what is it? He's like, look, if you're dealing with addicts and the mentally ill, it's all about carrots and sticks. You got to have carrots and sticks to change behavior. If you don't have carrots and sticks, nothing happens. That was all I said. I was like, come on, it can't be that simple, really, please. Is it that simple and stupid as that? Yes, that's all it is. Early 2019, I literally go to sleep on the subject until the fall of 2019, and then I write a column for Forbes that says that the governor needs to declare a state of emergency on homelessness in order to build more housing. Because, of course, if you think homelessness, you think housing. And I wrote that piece. I was very proud of myself, called for a state of emergency on housing. And some of my friends were like, dude, you think the people on the street are just like, they can't afford their rent? Like, they're suffering from drug addiction and mental illness. Like, everybody knows that. And I was like, ugh, I felt totally stupid. I remembered back to Renee. I made some phone calls. The first person I call on Skid Row in Los Angeles. Skid Row makes Tenderloin in South of Market, by the way, look like a walk in the park. Go to Skid Row. It's like truly Mad Max material. And I call one of the main charities on Skid Row, Union Rescue Mission, Christian charity, Reverend Andy Bales. And I'm like, so what percentage of people on the street are like addicted to drugs, like using drugs, addicted to drugs? He's like, what do you mean? It's like everybody, like 100%. I was like, I mean, like, can't be like 100%. He's like, yeah, I mean, like, that's why you're here. I mean, people are here to feed the addiction. And I was like, well, this guy is clearly some right-wing Christian guy, so let me find a harm reduction outreach worker. So I interviewed Dr. Susan Partovi, street doc. She and I had a similar past working with the Sandinistas, wearing the right clothing. So I get her on the phone. She's, clearly from the left. And I'm like, so, like, how many people on the street are, like, addicted to hard drugs? She was like, what do you mean? It's like everybody. It's like 100%. It's like everybody here. That's why they're here. And I was like, this is bizarre. Like, how is it that we were like, these people are just suffering from not being able to pay the rent? One of the first things I remembered back to Netherlands, I then went on Google Scholar, and one of the first papers that comes up when you search for open air drug markets is a study commissioned by the Norwegian government called Open Drug Scenes, Lessons from Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Lisbon, Vienna, Zurich. Turns out, you read this paper, they're describing open drug scenes, and it dawns on me after a few sentences in, I'm like, oh, they're talking about homeless encampments. They call them open drug scenes. They're being really honest about what it is. And I wrote my follow-up column. As soon as I did that, I had a homeless activist who runs a YouTube channel called Invisible People contact me and tell me that my column was going to cause violence against people on the street. And I was like, wow, that's horrible. I mean, I didn't write it. I wrote it because I'm worried about the people on the street. This kept happening. What's going on? Why is it that anybody that says the truth about what's happening on the street is accused of causing violence against people on the street? Like, what is this about? So peel the onion. Clearly, there's a lot going on. San Fransicko goes through the drugs element of it, the mental illness part of this. There's some people that think all addiction is a form of mental illness, or all addiction is, manifests from self-care. I don't necessarily have to go that far. I think some people just got too carried away at a party and got addicted to hard drugs. But that's the reality. Homelessness is a propaganda word. And that's not even my opinion. That's the opinion of Dennis Culhane, who is the lead homelessness researcher at Penn, the University of Pennsylvania. He does all the big studies for the housing and urban development. It's the opinion of Teresa Gowen, left-wing academic anthropologist at University of Minnesota. This word was chosen to trick your brains into thinking that the people on the street are there because they can't afford the rent. The people are on the street because they can't afford the rent, that's true. But they can't afford the rent because they no longer work because they spend all day long intoxicated on deeply addictive, intoxicating hard drugs. They were kicked out of their family's house or their friend's house because they weren't paying the rent, and they were stealing, lying, and cheating with their family because that's what addiction does to people. And that's how they became homeless. And this starts with the crack epidemic in the 80s. Two forces came together: deinstitutionalization, letting people out of the psychiatric hospitals first, and then second, the crack epidemic. That's what it was. And then the left invented this elaborate lie that this was about housing. I rescued your boy Reagan, by the way, on this issue in the book. Because you interview liberals and you're like, what is going on out there? And they're like, Reagan. I mean, it's like amazing, Reagan, what he's able to do still. I mean, we spend $11 billion a year on mental health in California, which is more than any other state per capita. And yet Reagan, it's still Reagan's fault there's so many mentally ill people on the street. I did the research on this issue, and by the time Reagan became governor, half of the people had already been let out of psychiatric hospitals. He had if there's a criticism of Reagan, it's that he didn't engage on this issue enough. And the conservative Christian orientation that he came from was not super comfortable with psychiatry or psychology or those things. But Reagan basically went along with an agenda that was driven by Democrats and by the ACLU to deinstitutionalize. The other thing that Reagan gets criticized for is cutting the federal housing budget. The federal housing budget went down just tiny amounts under Reagan. All of the big reforms to housing, including the destruction of the public housing, which were these big vertical slums everybody remembers, and the creation of Section 8 vouchers, which stimulates the private, all that occurs before Reagan. So Reagan doesn't really deserve any credit or blame. He's much more of a neutral figure on these issues. But nonetheless, Reagan remains the boogeyman. That was easy to debunk in the book. We didn't even really do deinstitutionalization. A lot of it is transinstitutionalization. The place that has the highest number of mentally ill people, the institution with the highest number of mentally ill people in the United States, is the Los Angeles County Jail. What does that say about us that we treat our mentally ill people in jails, in horrific plexiglass cages that are made out of plexiglass for reasons I don't want to describe? I had many things in this book. This was the most, Apocalypse Never was like a joyful book to write because all of the things that you worry about with the environment are much better than anybody knows. Carbon emissions are going down, deaths from natural disasters are going down, natural disasters themselves are going down over the last 20 years. Plastic dissolves in the ocean, actually. Don't recycle it. These are all good lessons. San Fransicko, everything I looked into was worse than I thought. I'm the most naive, gullible person. I mean, who else would defend Mayor Breed? Everybody in this room was skeptical of Mayor London Breed in December, not me. I was a true believer. I'm an optimistic person by temperament. I can't help it. But every time I come to the Tenderloin, I'm like, it's got to be better this time. It has to be better. I went to Skid Row. I was like, it's got to be better this time. And there were people laying literally in the gutter. Lying in the gutter in Skid Row. On Skid Row, the last time I visited a few weeks ago, I discovered a 2-story, because everybody needs a challenge as a reporter. It's boring to report the same thing. So I was like, this time I'm going to find the biggest structure I can find and figure out who's in it. I discovered a 2-story building, loft, wooden structure on the middle of the sidewalk in Skid Row. I go upstairs, I discover 2 beds, and it finally dawns on me that the guy's running a homemade brothel. Broke my heart. I have a special, everybody has their weakness. Mine is young women on the street, particularly ones that have hospital bands still around their wrists, or women who are clearly enslaved by their addiction and subjected to prostitution and rape. I interviewed the LA County Sheriff, and he says the chances of being raped as a woman in Skid Row are 100%. 100% within a few hours. That means that they did a study and they found a 100% rate of rape for women in Skid Row. Why the hell do we allow this to persist? Why did we do this? That is absolute madness. I'll tell you why the left allowed it. Because it's so compassionate. That is the honest truth. Is it Munchausen syndrome by proxy, whereby parents poison their children in order to heal them? I wouldn't go quite that far, but I come right up to that point in San Fransicko. I actually spent a fair amount of time trying to figure out if this was Munchausen syndrome by proxy or not. I don't think it is, but I think it's pathological altruism, or what Jordan Peterson, the great Canadian psychologist, calls the devouring mother. I must help you. Help, help. But addiction is this weird disease. It's a weird mental illness. We've known for 150 years that people that are addicts refuse help. That's a characteristic of the disease. Same characteristic for mental illness, by the way. We can get fancy words with it. We can call it lack of insight, call it delusion, whatever. It's just part of the disease. It's a terrible part of the disease. Nobody with cancer is like, yeah, no, I'm fine. I just want to keep my cancer going. I mean, unless you're terminal. Most people want to get better, but addiction and mental illness makes you worse. It's a function of the disease itself. We've known since after the Civil War, when all those women in the South discovered the leftover morphine from treating the soldiers, and they started doing morphine, getting high, and discovering that it solved all of their problems for 3 or 4 hours. We've known since that's the first opioid epidemic in the United States. We've known since then that people need intervention. You need someone to raise the floor. It's true what they say, that you do have to hit bottom to some extent. I agree with that. But where the bottom is constantly shifting. If your family holds an intervention on you, that might be your bottom. If you OD on the streets of San Francisco, They don't want that to be your bottom. They'll revive you and put you back out there. Go ahead. You're back up. Go back and smoke some more fentanyl and meth. That's what San Francisco does. And yet that's like that's the existential moment par excellence for people that OD. It's a chance to get your life together. It's all so simple. All you have to do is just like, hey, bro, you just almost died. You could be married, have kids, go back to school, have a job, be somebody special and important and live your life. And we've got a rehab clinic for you, an organic farm with woodworking classes and Python, a chance to reaffiliate with your family. We'll get you on a Suboxone taper right now. That's all it is. Is no complexity technologically to anything I'm describing. This is just as dumb and simple as Renee said. It's carrots and sticks. Now, there needs to be some consequence. You know, we catch you ODing again, you're going to be arrested and brought to the police station, and there's going to be serious consequences for you. That's the stick part. We don't do that. But we don't do the carrot part either. You need Cal Psych. You need some agency with mobile vans and Suboxone and telepsychiatry ready to go. It's not complicated. It's not like nuclear engineering or something. That shit's hard. This is just basic stuff. Just pull what they did. Just go. This one paper describes everything they did. You know, we're not here to be prudes about this. You know, we're going to do methadone and Suboxone. These are opioid replacement therapies. We're not doing that. I brought my new friend Kanita here. I discovered her brother on the street smoking fentanyl and meth. We don't know if he suffers mental illness. It's not fair to her and her family that her brother is left to be so poorly mistreated on the streets. And we can describe all the reasons for it, our ugly history of racism, the structural racism and systemic racism that continue to exist. But we can, who knows? At the end of the day, her brother needs help, and there's only one way to get street addicts their help, and it's the way that Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Lisbon, Vienna, and Zurich did it. There's no creativity in this department. If you go to Tokyo, they deal with the addict population slightly differently, the mentally ill population slightly differently. Not that differently. It's still intervention. Everybody knows this. We have a whole TV show called Intervention. It's like there's some new subtleties with addiction science. We know that there's this flux of dopamine and that hard times come with good times, and they're doing some amazing work at Stanford. It's not that different from 150 years ago. It's not that different from the after-school specials I watched in the late 70s and early 80s, thanks to Nancy Reagan. It's not that different. You have to have intervention. Okay, we don't need to be prudes about it. You can have methadone, Suboxone, all the rest. What does this mean for you guys? What does this mean for the center-right? The good news is, when this problem emerged in Amsterdam in the late 1980s and early 1990s, they did the exact same thing that we're doing in California. Just the namby-pamby stuff. Here, have some methadone. Oh, but you can stay there in the sidewalk and shoot heroin. That's fine, because you're all victims. That was the original idea. And then a new center-right party formed. It said, this is ridiculous. We're going to shut down the open drug scenes. We're going to give people the help they need. It's going to involve both the police and the social workers. That's a big part of it. The police and social workers working together. Okay, it's not one or the other. Don't be replacing the police with social workers. That's dangerous to the social workers. They work together. That's what they did in Netherlands. That political party succeeded in Amsterdam. They are now the governing party of the Netherlands and my friends. And they are pro-nuclear power. They're shutting down open drug scenes. And as far as I can tell, they do the best job, the most humane and most efficient job of dealing with this problem. So I propose a modified Dutch solution. There's nothing original in San Francisco. There's nothing, anti-original books. It's just a synthesis of what works around the world. Do they do it slightly differently in Japan and Korea? Sure. Do they do it slightly different in Portugal? Yeah. We have been subjected to so much misinformation on this issue. The New York Times in particular, promoting the idea that Oregon is doing what Portugal is doing. I interviewed the head of Portugal's drug program, and I said, João Goulao. I was like, João, what happens if I shoot heroin in a public park in Lisbon? What happens to me? You would be arrested. I was like, what? He's like, you would be arrested. Well, that's a totally different story than what I read in the New York Times. You'd be arrested and taken to the police station. If you have drugs over the amount allowed for by personal possession, you will be prosecuted for drug trafficking. If you have the amount under the amount allowed for personal possession, you will be brought before something called the Commission for the Dissuasion of Addiction. If that doesn't sound terrifying, and it's even worse than that because it's not just social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, lawyers, it's also your family. Oh, God. Can you imagine? That would get anybody to quit, right? Now, can we do that here in the United States where 50 to 95% of the people on the street are from out of town? Maybe not. That's why I kind of go with the Dutch model. It's a more cosmopolitan city, but it's still pressure, it's intervention. Do they criminalize addiction? Not really, okay? If you have a fentanyl or meth habit and you smoke in the privacy of your home and you're not breaking any laws other than being an idiot and smoking fentanyl and meth in the privacy of your home, I don't think that we should spend any taxpayer dollars going after you. I think we should stigmatize it. I think it's bonkers and stupid and crazy and maybe sinister. But for me, this freedom issue is not, there's all this argument with reason I had a little bit. I don't that's fine. But if you're on the street breaking laws against public camping, breaking laws against public drug use, breaking laws against public defecation, you should be arrested. That's your chance to get the help you need. That's your cry for help, and we're going to respond to it. Taking responsibility is about being responsive. It's about responding to what's going on in the world. When I got done with this book, what I realized is that at every level in our society, people have stopped taking responsibility. The governor discovers that there's been looting of trains in LA, and he shows up and he goes, "Who the hell is in charge around here? Who is running the state?" Mayor Breed says, "Well, we can't control where people do drugs." I mean, right. Why have laws, right? I mean, people are going to break laws. Why have laws at all? Why have cities? Why have a civilization? That's the level that we're at right now. Complete breakdown of responsibility. Somebody has to take it. It's going to come from the center right, and I think it needs to happen now. Thank you very much.
Pose a few questions for you, because I've got a whole bunch of questions for you. Okay. I do have a couple of follow-ups on what you presented here, but I'm just going to presume that everyone's going to buy the book who hasn't already, and you'll get the full case on it. So I want to, right, and Mike will be signing books in the back after we're done with some questions and comments. So I do want to draw out a little bit and get a couple broader things from you, because I think you're such an interesting guy, broadly speaking. One is, I already referred to this. I wonder if you could briefly give us a synoptic account of your, I don't necessarily ideological odyssey, but clearly you've moved some. And I wonder if you could list one or two milestones and then culminate, if you can, with how you conceive of yourself now. Although I'll say, feel free to paraphrase a current popular slogan, feel free to reject the ideological binary if you want.
Sure, okay. So, look, when I stopped doing this work in the late 1990s on drugs, my understanding was that we were trying to get people into rehab, that the goal was recovery. I never signed up for addiction maintenance. That's what this is, addiction maintenance. I have some people that say to me, okay, what about the 75-year-old dude who's been doing heroin for 35 years? Okay, there are some people that are just it's going to be rough for them to quit at that point. Some people need palliative care. My stepfather passed away recently. I had palliative care. I love palliative care. God, I hope I have palliative care at some point. Palliative care is a beautiful thing. Not for a 25-year-old. Not for Corey. Not for Kanita's brother. Yeah, for a 32-year-old man who can get his life back together. We can help him get his life back together. It's dehumanizing. Recovery is the goal. So that part did not change at all. I thought that, I will say one thing that changed, I thought that rehab was something that was sort of done to you. We're going to give that guy rehab. It doesn't, you have to decide that you're not going to be a drug addict anymore at a certain level. I quit drinking 3 years ago. I decided I wasn't going to have a drinking problem anymore, and that meant I wasn't going to drink anymore. That's what it took. I was very fortunate in that that was it. Just like a switch was flipped. Not everybody is that lucky, but it is something that has to come within you. Suboxone and methadone are helpful to transition out of it, but I don't think the goal is to get everybody on methadone for the rest of their lives. If that's what needs to happen with some people, that's okay. There's this issue of this horrible, horrible fentanyl and meth smoking section of United Nations Plaza. They have literally taken a part of in the name of progress. These are the liberals. Like, do you guys remember we used to have conferences on livable, walkable cities? A big part of it was that we were not going to have any cigarette smoking anywhere or smoking sections. So now you still can't smoke cigarettes, but you can smoke meth and fentanyl. Just go down to the corner. There's some nice Honduran boys there that will sell you some fentanyl and meth. You know, at just $20, $30 a day, you can satisfy your entire habit of smoking meth and fentanyl a day. Go to the smoking section, which the city runs. Your taxes pay for to run that thing. Now, is there a place? Does Netherlands have any of that? Yes. Okay, there are 28 places that do allow homeless addicts to come in and use. They're small, they're moving people into rehab. There is a total of 120 people in the Netherlands that are allowed to have medical heroin because these are people who they would just go to prison rather than give up their heroin. And they tried everything with them, and they're older, and it's basically palliative care. 120 people total, okay? When I heard about that, I told Renee, I was like, if you did that in California, it'd be 120,000 people on heroin. So the system matters. So I don't know, have I changed? I mean, the left and right thing is confusing. My argument that I want to make to all of you and persuade you of is that this can't be solved in the counties, okay? 58 different workforces trying to solve this. You have people moving around, the highly transient population. You can't house all the drug addicts in the United States in San Francisco. You can't do it. You can't treat them all here. You might be able to afford it. I mean, there's so many billionaires here, but there's not even places for them. So you're going to need a statewide solution to move people into residential care, rehab, psychiatric hospitals. Has to be a statewide solution. Conservatives, as a rule, you guys don't love new government programs. But this is one that if you do Cal Psych right, then the crappy county-based service programs, including the Department of Public Health in San Francisco, would wither away, or you'd be pulling your staff from them. So I would say that part is still pretty liberal. I mean, when you go to the Netherlands and you're like, and you say to somebody on the street, like, you got to be in a shelter, and I say to Renee, do you have a shelter space for him? Of course we have shelter space for him. We have more psych beds than we need. You have to have that. But that doesn't mean that you let them do anything. So I guess, I don't know that I'm saying that it's neither left nor right, but I am saying that this particular problem, it requires carrots and sticks, right? It requires something liberal, which is medical care for indigent people, and it requires law enforcement. I mean, in that sense, I don't think it's that complicated.
Yeah. So by the way, I think a great message. I mean, I've been frustrated for at least 2 decades, if not longer, at conservative politicians and some thought leaders who say, why bother with the cities? It's just a nest of Democrats. And I always think that even from a cynical point of view, that's short-sighted. For the reason you point out, if you actually start making some improvements there, like Giuliani in certain respects in New York, guess what? You actually start creating a governing majority, right? Even on practice. So I hope that your message gets through just from a practical point of view, if nothing else, for the reasons I've heard you state. I have a suggestion for your next book. I was going to do some other questions first, but let me do it now. I'd like to say that progressives have what I call Denmark envy. This is sort of well known. We like that, or Sweden, and those social democracies of Europe. Yeah, they have higher taxes, but higher social services, and we really wish we had that. But as you point out, I think other examples. There's lots of ways in which those countries are to the right of the United States in some ways. Again, the conventional terms, which you may or may not embrace fully, but you see the point I'm getting at. I'd love to see you, for your next book, write something along the lines of what progressives can learn from the European social democracies that teases out some of the other things that not on the radar screen at all, right? So how about, can I be your agent for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll just say 2 things about it. So one of the things that didn't even make it in San Francisco, because you always discover these things after the book comes out, Europeans spend more money per capita on police than we do. They have more police per capita than we do. So this idea that the left says of we're over-policed is total bullshit. It was never true. And then the other issue is health insurance. I mean, I always loved the simplicity of a single-payer Canadian system. I don't understand why you have to have all these private insurers. It never made sense to me. fine. My wife and sister say it's fine. But it really took the Netherlands, where they have a private insurance system too. So they just basically did what we did. They have a private insurance system, but they make sure that people get the care they need. So I don't think we need to be dogmatic about these issues of the private insurer model. I came to the exact same place, by the way, on electricity. The French have a publicly owned electrical sector. Ours is a mix. I think it's 2/3 private utilities and 1/3 public. I mean, I can't tell much of difference. I mean, you have some corruption in the public version, you have corruption in the private version. It's a natural monopoly, electricity, because we don't want a bunch of firms competing to string up electrical wire everywhere. It'd be a nightmare. It's a natural monopoly. Almost everybody except for the really extreme libertarians recognize that. So then you can have it be a, publicly owned or private. It doesn't matter. Like these issues, which I think I've seen left and right debate around how much government, how much private sector, I just don't think are the main event. I think right now we're just dealing with the radical left, which wants to just de-police, de-civilize, destroy the institutions that make our civilization possible. And then you've got our right, like you said, that kind of goes, well, we'll go ahead and take the red states. Thanks. A lot of people on Twitter, they're like, you guys are killing yourselves, that's fine. It's not fine. It's not fine if we want to have a country. It's not fine if we would like to be a single nation rather than divide into two parts or multiple parts, which, I don't want to exaggerate that threat, but this country's levels of polarization are so extreme and so high, we've got to do something to find some common ground, I think.
Yeah. Let me ask you just one question about energy and environment. I've been saying for a long time, I never thought I'd live long enough to see prominent people in the environmental community come out in favor of nuclear power. I just thought that would never happen, having remembered Jane Fonda in the 70s. And now a lot of them are. And I think you've had more to do with that happening than anybody. And I know you're focusing on these issues now and so forth, but I wonder if you'd say a word or two on, I'm not sure how you want to take it, how you changed your mind or what you see happening. And I know you've been attacked for it, and others like Stuart Brand have been attacked for this. It's still a fundamentalism for some environmentalists, but more seem to be saying openly and certainly privately, yeah, we made a mistake 40 years ago. So
we've seen a huge change on nuclear power. I would say nuclear is now, if not the most mainstream solution to climate change, close to being the most mainstream. It helps that Europe is in a serious energy crisis created by climate activists who restricted investment in oil and gas production and shut down nuclear plants. But we've done tons of work on nuclear. I've personally been involved in saving 22 nuclear reactors, which is about the same as 22 million cars on the road from being shut down. South Korea, Illinois, New Jersey, Connecticut. Nuclear is back in Europe in a really big way. And you can see it in the polling, actually. Democrats, I think we went from something like 38% to over 55% support for nuclear over the last 3 or 4 years. So I think it does. This was our original vision, was that when I started working on nuclear, more or less 3/4 time or close to full time at some points, starting in 2016, my colleagues were just like, you can't, there's no way, it's too tied up with core values, and no, there's just no way you'll move people on it. My view was it's just something that people think, it's not what people think it is. Most liberals thought it was a bomb. So all you have to do is be like, yeah, it's not a bomb. That's not what it is. If it melts down, you might get some radiant pollution, but it turns out even that's not even as harmful as people think. And that all the cost stuff is nonsense that has to do with subsidies and policies. So it just took a process of convincing people. And I think that's happening on this issue much faster. Because when I talk about nuclear power, I can hold the attention of people for 7 to 8 minutes. On this issue, on the destruction of our society, on the devastation of, the loss of our humanity. I came out here I've been out here a lot. I was out here a week ago, and I was checking in on Kanita's brother, Corey, the second time I'd seen him. And I saw what I thought was a young man, or he looked like a 15-year-old boy, African-American boy, in a blanket, clearly psychotic, and a few feet away from Corey. And I went up to him, and then as I got closer, I saw that he was a woman completely naked under this blanket, lying on the sidewalk. Corey had a much more sketchy dude with him the time I checked on him the second time. I'm a sensitive person. I just was like, this is so wrong. You call the police right away. Oh yeah, they're interested, yeah. I was like, I got photos, videos, let me help you find this person. Nothing. I mean, Kanita's a miracle because we have, I posted the photos of Kanita's brother, and we have a mutual, well, not mutual, but a woman who, she doesn't even want me to reveal her name. She runs emergency department during the day, searches for homeless people on her free time. And she discovered, this of course was all happening while I'm being attacked on Twitter for supposedly violating people's privacy on the street. And we ended up finding Kanita that way. We're going to go look for Corey after this. But I mean, I just don't have much. I mean, I'm just kind of like, this is not right. Like, I don't want to live here if this is what this shit's going to be. I mean, I feel like I'm living in apartheid South Africa. My taxes are going to maintaining and worsening human misery on the street. I don't want to be here for it. Sorry, am I digressing?
No.
I mean, I just kind of go like, what are we doing? Like, what is this even about? Like, I didn't write that book to sell a bunch. I mean, great, sold a lot of copies, but what are we doing, guys? Like, if we can't maintain civilization, we can't maintain our humanity.
What you said a moment ago, both about nuclear power and this, an observation I've often used with people, with you as my example, is that when, not that you're on the left, but just for provisional purposes, when conservatives get upset about something, they start a magazine. Michael, as you can see, is no mere scribe. When he got upset about nuclear power plants being closed or seeing the homelessness on the street, he doesn't just write a book. He starts a protest. You let him march to Sacramento to keep Diablo Canyon open. I know I've been part of some of your work with governors and other states to not shut down nuclear power plants. He does stuff. We should take a page from that. You've said a few things, so you've done the book, and you obviously have the passion for this issue. And again, I think you also see something I've seen in Michael for a decade and a half now. When he puts his single-minded focus on a subject or even an aspect of a subject, look out. So what's next? What's the follow-up in the world of action on this subject for Michael Shellenberger or anybody else who will come along with you?
I mean, we're in the midst of it right now, you guys. I mean, this is not a problem that can be solved with the leaders that we have. I interviewed Tom Insel, who's one of the leading mental health experts in the country, ran the National Institute of Mental Health for 12 years under Republican and Democratic presidents. He's the right-hand advisor to Gavin Newsom. When I interviewed him, and I put some of it on Twitter, he just kept saying, I was like, is it a money problem? Because it seems like we're spending a lot of money. He's like, no, there's a shitload of money. It's great doing these interviews by Zoom, because then I have all the little video clips. He's like, no, it's not that. And he goes, it's a leadership problem. And then as soon as he'd say that, I'd kind of look at him, and he kind of changed the subject. I was kind of like, I think I know what you're saying. We have a leadership problem. I was trying to develop a ballot initiative, and was even starting to look into raising some money for it, like in early 2020. And it just became clear that first of all, the donors were not educated. That's part of the reason I wanted to write Fransicko, was just to lay out a complete case of what the problem is and how to solve it. But this is a problem that requires actual leadership over time to create a world-class addiction and psychiatric care system, which is what we should have. I mean, here we have world-class everything in California. It's a premium state, right? You know that from your tax bill every year. Why? I mean, we should have world-class. We should be competing with the Netherlands and Japan and France and Germany on our psychiatric and addiction care system. So there's just no way this can be. We've got a governor. He's sort of stuck in the narcissistic phase of human development. He didn't get the love at the right time. And so now he's writing children's books. He doesn't understand when you spend your entire career licking boots and then you get into power, you're kind of like, who's in charge around here? And everyone's like, you're in charge. And you're like, I didn't sign up for that. I signed up for boot licking, right? So, I mean, that's what it is. Sorry, it's not, it's equal opportunity. It's Gavin, it's Mayor Breed. You suck up your whole life and you get into power, and then you're shocked that you don't know how to do anything. There's no more boots to lick. These guys are constantly going after the next brass ring. Matt Haney here, who represents the Tenderloin District, now he's going to run for the legislature. On what record? Like, what are you doing? It's just, I got endorsed by the right unions, and so it's pathetic. It's totally pathetic. I mean, we've got to change the leadership in the state. We've got to change it at every level of government. It means we have to find candidates that can win and run them and back them and win. That's the only solution. I'm not moving to Florida, right? Neither, you guys are all here, right? Let's stay and fight and win. That means we've got to change our leaders and change the agenda with which they're governing.
One more question from me for the moment, and then I'll take some audience questions. So we're meeting today, obviously the day after the recall election of the school boards. Now, separate issue, but the dimensions of this are so large. And I think it's going to reverberate across the country, but there has to be some spillover or carryover. And so, are you encouraged by this, or say what you're going to do with it, or how to run with it?
Oh, absolutely. This is huge. I believe the final vote was 75-25. Is that right?
It qualifies as a landslide, I think.
Yeah, I think you're seeing. This is really important. San Franciscans are not monolithically radical left. I think that's clear from this vote. I think that we're sick of all the racist woke bullshit. I mean, you remember the woman Allison Collins insulted all Asians in the name of anti-racism. Insulted all Asians. Like, it's offensive. We're sick of that. Like, we want to get away from that stuff. So I think the backlash against that it's full blown. Joe Rogan is the most important media figure by a mile because he eschews all of that, right? So I think that's happening. I think we see more swagger on the part of the high-tech community. We have some new high-tech donors. They were very focused on their businesses, but there's a moment when Carnegie and Rockefeller and Mellon and these guys, they get rich enough that they're like, okay, I better take care of the city, build some libraries, advocate for better leadership. I think that moment is starting to happen. I think we're in a very dynamic moment historically. I think we're at the end of the neoliberal era, the end of the post-Cold War era. We're in a new era, a reversion back towards nationalism, a reversion back towards openly political journalism. Like, the New York Times doesn't hide anymore what it's about. There's actually something refreshing about that. I think what's happening in the media space is super exciting. Social media has changed all of this. I'm actually making money for the first time as a journalist, which is crazy. No, I mean, seriously, crazy, right? So there's things that are happening, and I think the mood has shifted. I don't know if you guys saw that big poll that came out from Berkeley yesterday, and I believe that the governor's disapproval ratings on homelessness were over 70%. So people are properly unhappy. COVID's going away. I mean, they're going to slow walk the masks. The poor kids, they're going to persecute the children for as long as they can. But it's going to go away. And when it goes away, we all want to be together. We're going to see some really exciting live events. I think it's going to be I'm looking forward to the rest of the year.
Yeah, I keep saying that masks have become the MAGA hats of progressives, which is one reason to tuck in on it. Right? Gentleman in the back had his hand up. I think that was you. Yeah, speak loudly, and I'll probably repeat the question for our tape. So.
You talk about carrot and stick, and you talk about prisons being horrible in this situation. You didn't come back to that. Will a psychiatric thing take care of prison? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want mass homelessness and crime on the one hand, and you don't want mass incarceration, because they don't have mass incarceration in Europe. Now, okay, I get it. It's a homogenous society. These are small societies, trying to blah, 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 blah. I know all that. But if you assume maybe we're a more violent society for a lot of different reasons, we're always going to have higher levels of incarceration. Okay, fine. But if you want to reduce that, then you need the 3 key Ps. Took me a long time to get to that. So, by the way, 3 key Ps. You'll remember it now that I made a big deal of it. Policing, psychiatry, and probation. Those are the 3 key Ps to ending mass homelessness. I'll give you an example. Drug testing and electronic monitoring as forms of probation. These are fantastic technologies. Like if you're a new father, a new parent, and the choices for the judge is you can either go to prison or jail and be away from your family, or you can be at home with an ankle monitor and take a urine test. Come on, guys. ACLU is just out to lunch on this. If that issue is put before the people of California, they'll side with us over ACLU. Electronic monitoring, it's like humane. That's probation. Policing is just good. Forget about it. I wrote a piece on how Dallas reduced homicides and crime last year for New York Post. And there's all this, it's technical, there's place network investigations, and we have a grid system, and, And you're kind of like, but doesn't every city have the same tech, for fighting crime and identifying? Yeah, so what's the difference in Dallas? The mayor believed in fighting crime. He hired a really good police chief. They hired away the San Jose police chief. Black Democratic mayor, Latino police chief. These are really warm, smart guys that they understand that nobody wants crime. So they actually made and they have the morale of the cop. So positive morale, positive feeling, belief. We're trying to save lives. We're trying to prevent crime. We're trying to prevent people from being raped and robbed and murdered. It's a beautiful mission. The police get to do that, right? I mean, these should be heroes. I mean, I'm not some dumb, back the blue guy or something. I mean, bad cops. Nobody hates, my parents were teachers. Nobody hates a bad teacher more than a good teacher. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop. So get the bad cops out, fine. But you have to support the cop. You have to fund them. And they have to have their workshops and their sensitivity trainings and all that. It's a positive investment, a lot cheaper than prison. And what I say, psychiatry. When you read San Fransicko, you'll see that the left has just been weirdly anti-psychiatry just because they're anti-civilization. It starts with Michel Foucault, but Thomas Szasz and R.D. Laing. So you got to have psychiatry, and I mean rehab too. A lot of times you'll meet somebody in the street, they're psychotic. Is it underlying schizophrenia? Is it all the meth use? Whatever. They need psychiatric help and probation. That's what they need. Corey, Kanita's brother, is the sweetest guy. So sweet. He doesn't need to go to prison. He needs rehab, family reaffiliation, maybe a Suboxone taper, a job, purpose, meaning. This is not complicated. But we do need to have a system for it, and we don't have that right now.
Giselle, I saw your hand. Oh, yeah.
Kanita.
Camille, sure.
Corey, I did feel bad for a while because I felt like he did need to go to prison. He did need to go to prison because that would allow him to have the time that he needed in order to detox so that he would be able to have a clear head and go into rehabilitation properly. And so even though I don't want to agree with policing, I do agree with policing with positive morale.
Thanks, Kanita. Did people here in the back hear that Kanita said that she thought her brother did need some time? Yeah, and one of some of the characters in the book, some of those beautiful people are people that are in recovery from addiction. They're so honest. They talk about how terrible they were as addicts. It's so honest. But yeah, like a lot of them just had to be arrested. Had to have the threat of jail or prison. They had to have that stick. They needed it. They say they're grateful to the police officers that arrested them. So for sure. Yeah, but not 10 years, not 20 years. He doesn't need that.
We're getting a lot of hands. I saw Giselle next.
I'm a proponent of universal basic income, and I'm wondering whether you are familiar with some of the experiments that have been going on, one in England and more recently in Vancouver, Canada, where cash was given to homeless people, and the results have been quite good.
I suspect, I suspect, if we just gave Corey money right now, it would all go to fentanyl and meth, okay? All of it, all the money. So now fentanyl and meth are so cheap right now that you can have a really serious drug habit for somewhere around $50 to $60 right now. I think when you look at experiments like that, in my experience, often people are misattributing things to the universal basic income or to the cash. There's usually something else going on, helping, require. So for example, one of the things, so if you really simplify what I'm describing, if I really simplify it, I go enforce laws. That's number one. I know it's radical sounding. Enforce laws, including a ban on illegal camping, shelter first, housing earned, and then Cal Psych or universal psychiatry. So shelter first, housing earned. I saw this occur all the time with Renee, where he'd be arguing with somebody with a mental illness or something, and they'd be like, "I want my own apartment. I want my own room." And he's like, "Well, you take your psych meds and you get your own room. Pass the drug test, you get your own room. Failed the drug test, you go back to congregate housing." Which is the crappy shelter where you have to share with everybody. Everybody wants their privacy, right? So you have to create incentives along the way. So I think there's something beautiful and elegant about universal basic income, and I love Andrew Yang for reasons that I don't even totally understand. But I think for me, addicts and the mentally ill, they need some structure to get them on the straight and narrow. Just giving them cash is not going to fix it.
Yeah, yes, sir.
In a city that has ranked choice voting, how do we change the management of the city?
Look, you guys need good candidates. I mean, it's just that simple, you know.
Choice voting is if you have a good candidate, because they can be diluted with a whole bunch of other candidates who have no opportunity for winning, but dilute the idea that the good candidate doesn't get 50% plus one vote. That's the point.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, there's a similar debate going on around district elections. It seems like district elections made everybody more provincial and NIMBY and narrow. I don't know. You're at a level of process that I'm not at.
I might do a whole separate event on that sometime,
Yeah.
because I hate
That's not
ranked choice
me.
voting.
He's the government guy.
Yeah, yes, sir.
I'm curious,
yeah, sorry.
I'm curious to know your view on why we have shifted so much towards sympathy, creating victimhood, instead of pushing people and moving them to a positive direction and saying, there, here's a bone, you stay on the street, or you stay poor, or you stay on. What has happened, and this is the intelligentsia. These are people that have made money working hard. Love your response.
I was going to ask you that question in a different form, so go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole beautiful literature on victim culture and the rise of victim ideology. I mean, I don't have anything super novel to say that hasn't been said in those books. I agree that this basic transition from the farm to the city, where you're just in pretty brutal farming life, where everyone's like working hard like 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and spare the rod, spoil the child, and you get into the city and the coddling. I mean, I couldn't even figure out when coddling started. I was like, I think coddling starts in 1920 or something. You know, like it's just a coddling all the way. So some of that's just rising wealth and entropy. There is so I saw in the Netherlands, you know, I would see René, who was sort of the tough guy who had this really formative experience shutting down the open drug scene. And I would see him argue with younger, like millennial age Dutch who would be like, hey, you know, Jim wants his own private apartment. Can we just give him one? And René would be like, no, you can't just give him. He's got to earn it. He's not, give me his charts. He's not taking his meds. So why do you want to give him his own? Well, because he really wants one. You know, and it's like, no. So the wall, you know, the entropy is always there, and it takes a René and a political formation to argue for it. That's the first part of it. The second part is ideological, obviously, right? I mean, like the intellectuals, as you point out, have been, for a variety of reasons that Steve and I can discuss late into the night, you know, have tried to exert their power over society against the market, for example, against market forces, against the forces that would create more of that discipline, and it gives them power. You know, I mean, it's these. I find myself, it's one of these things like, God, who am I fighting with? But it's like I'm having this argument with the people running this heinous abomination, you know, fentanyl and meth smoking center in downtown San Francisco. I'm having this argument with them. And I just, you know, I met some of them, and I'm just kind of like, they're just like the worst petty bureaucrats. I mean, it's just like, you know, you rip back the curtain and you're like, what is this thing? And it's just someone that spouts woke bullshit on a Friday night at the party, but they're like, they've made their way up to middle management at the Department of Public Health. You know, they just need to they need to be fired. You know, but you have to push back against them, and they have the ideology and the whole thing. But I think, look, that's what this opportunity is, you guys. I mean, the crisis is so serious. It's a chance for us to properly get ourselves together.
You know, my old public choice question is, you mentioned the book, the shocking amounts of money we spend on this. So, question, what's the interest in all those people in actually ending homelessness? The answer is pretty obvious. Chris.
Yeah, thank you. Michael, you mentioned the inefficacy of the counties, sort of the distributed approach. As you know, the last couple of years, the legislature and governor had this Project Home Key, where they put tens and hundreds of millions of dollars into counties to buy old hotels or a dilapidated building and turn it into housing for the homeless. And it's exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. There's land use streamlining, sort of, this is being shoved down the throats of the counties. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, nightmare. I mean, we're warehousing mentally ill addicts into hotel rooms. They trash the hotel rooms. I mean, they've many of these places are just destroyed. Gavin literally last year in the middle of the year invited people to come here. So we've been inviting addicts, the mentally ill. We let 22,000 people out of prison in the name of COVID. I mean, I did an interview last week that went viral of a guy with tattoos on his face. Go check out my Twitter feed. And he was like, look, if I'm being honest, man, it's pretty good to be homeless here. You know, I get paid $620 a month to be homeless. So, I mean, it's like, yeah, that program you're describing, Chris, and like 12 other programs are contributing to no accountability. The basic idea is that once you're declared a victim, everything to you should be given and nothing required. So the good news is, you know, the pieces of, if you were to try to transform California into the Dutch model, the pieces are there. They're just using them totally wrong. And the reason you need a hierarchical, centralized state apparatus is to drive those changes. The only way things really occur in our society is with hierarchy. You know, I think there's been this libertarian idea, or what I mean, it's like people with schizophrenia or addiction, they're not out there shopping, exercising free choice to find out where am I going to get my best treatment, you know? So, and then the counties, it is what it is. The conservative counties are more strict, and so addicts and the mentally ill go to places like San Francisco where they are expecting to get handouts with nothing required of them in return. It's not sustainable. It's what's led to the disaster.
All right, last question from me, and then we're going to let you sell and sign some books. Okay, cool. By the way, ground rules on buying books is when you're up there getting Michael to sign it and describe it, you may only ask him yes or no questions. Because as you can see, if you ask him a more complex question, only 2 people will get their book signed before we have to depart. But practical question, Michael, for people who want to follow what you're up to, maybe join a march, maybe show up at an important meeting of the supervisors or whatever. How do they follow you? Where should they go?
I mean, the most important thing is to sign up to subscribe to my Substack. So it's just Google Substack Shellenberger, and you will be able to sign up to get those emails. If you are following me on Twitter, it's @ShellenbergerMD. Those are my initials, not my qualifications. But Substack is the best right now. That's how I'm really communicating with folks.
Michael, you are sobering, but also thrilling in a certain way. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, brother.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.